Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. This video is my review for the 9th episode of DC Stargirl titled Brainwave. And this was actually a really eventful episode which I was not expecting. Looking back, Brainwave seemed like one of the lamer villains, but now that I think about it, he's really powerful and this episode really fleshed him out, same with Henry. It also gave us more information that makes me wonder if the ISA and JSA are time displaced. The plot of the episode was that after finding out Henry has his dad's powers, Courtney wanted to recruit him onto the team, which caused tension among them. Pat got more worried about what the ISA could be planning now that he knows Ito is involved, and Barbara invited the McKents over for dinner. So surprisingly, the flashbacks were back for the start of the episode. We didn't have any for Cindy, so I assumed that we weren't going to be using them anymore. We got to see a younger version of Brainwave as he committed his first murder. He seemed a bit more innocent and actually afraid of his powers. At first we saw him being like Henry has recently and trying to take pills to control his headaches. After struggling with that outside, he was approached by a man threatening to kill him, but thanks to his powers, he wasn't able to. I wasn't sure if he killed the guy on purpose, but once he realized what happened, he ran off and suddenly we switched over to a tape. I like how they transitioned over into Henry's story as he was watching the tapes. But there was something confusing about this. We have constantly been getting evidence that the ISA and the JSA could be time displaced. There was even more later on in this episode, but everything here contradicts it. At the beginning of the episode, they didn't specify the year and just said decades ago, but we know that Charles was around during World War II and so was Dr. Shiro Ito. So we can assume that everyone else is as old as them. However, how the hell would Brainwave have access to a camera in that time unless Brainwave is younger than the others and joined the team later on? We learned that Brainwave got his powers by experimenting on himself after his superiors wouldn't allow him to continue his test. So typical mad scientist thing. He actually seemed like a nice person who was in love with science but accidentally ended up with these powers he was afraid of and was traumatized by what they made him do. However, then it seemed like something happened and he broke and he became fascinated with his power and no longer cared about the fact that he was a killer. We saw Henry trying out his powers as he learned more about how they worked and exactly what he could do, such as controlling his telekinesis, and he seemed pretty excited about it. I also found it strange how he did not seem to care at all about the fact that his dad is a killer. Henry continued benching through the tapes the whole day and we learned more about Brainwave's childhood. I thought he was going to say his dad beat him or something, and it turns out he did have an abusive father who would hold him over a well. As we learned about Brainwave's past, it kinda makes sense that he broke so easily, I guess. He was abused and mistreated by everyone throughout his life, and once he gained power, he could use it to put himself in control. A really interesting part we learned was that causing pain relieves his headaches, which is why he felt better after he killed that guy. He felt this again after killing a rapist after he heard his thoughts. So like the X-Men and Black Lightning, the show is kind of showing the darker side of having these powers. It's not all fun being a superhero. As Brainwave mostly heard people's negative thoughts, and it led him to believe that humanity are all monsters. Deep down, everyone is evil. So he's like William Golding, believing humans are all savages and that they just need something to bring it out. Brainwave fits into this because we saw him spiral into a villain once he killed that guy. Although an interesting part is that he was killing horrible people like possible rapists once he read their thoughts. So just like Icicle, he was trying to combat injustice. But there's also the question of whether he should have the right to punish someone for a crime they haven't committed. Like with the rapist, yes, it's beneficial for him because it reduces his headaches and he is taking out a possibly bad person, but it also raises those questions like Marvel did with Civil War II. Anyway, the maid came in and was worried about Henry and told him a lawyer wanted to talk to him about his dad. However, just like his dad, Henry read her negative thoughts and that made him be mad at her. Then he heard his dad's voice and ran off to the hospital. At the hospital, Henry kept hearing people's negative thoughts, like that one guy who wanted the woman he was with to die already so that he would get the car, and all of this was negatively influencing him, but he couldn't talk about it with his dad like he wanted to. A doctor came in to check on his dad and Henry read his thoughts and learned that he hated his dad. For a second I thought he would kill him. Finally onto Courtney. She was back home telling Pat about the fight at Cindy's house and how she discovered that Henry had his powers. She felt bad for him and was contemplating asking him to join the team. However, Pat was not listening because he was still focused on the fact that Dr. Ito is alive and working with the ISA, since that means that they're definitely planning something bad. He also did not seem to care about Courtney running off by herself again. Actually, no one even brought that up this whole episode. But they did finally bring up how strange it is that the JSA would have ran into Ito since he was around during the war. And we learned that it wasn't the JSA that fought him. Pat fought him as a member of the 7 Soldiers of Victory. I love how Courtney mentioned that there's actually 8 members. I feel like they probably didn't count Pat. But the coolest part of this was our first look at the Green Arrow and Speedy of Earth 2. It's no longer Robert Queen or Adrian Chase, but instead it's a Golden Age version of Oliver Queen. Of course, Courtney disrespected them by calling him Robin Hood and calling Vigilante a cowboy, who is also the Golden Age version and not Adrian Chase or Dinah's ex. I love these little cameos, and I hope we get to see more of these characters later on. Since we also got our first look at Shining Knight and his armor in that picture, I was worried about how his armor would look in live action, but that armor looked great. The weird thing is that Pat named everyone in the picture except Green Arrow and Speedy, so I'm wondering if they didn't have permission to use the name at the time because Arrow was still going when they were filming, and DC had that stupid rule that you can only have one version of a character at a time. I wish Courtney would have brought up the fact that Sylvester, the man that she thinks is her father, was literally a child in this picture, and Pat looked exactly the same as he does now. There has to be something going on with the JSA. Since Henry spent the whole day at home, I assumed they didn't have school, but we saw Beth on her way to school, and she passed by Cindy's house where we learned that Cindy is no longer enrolled at school. This kind of makes sense because it would have been weird to have them interacting at school while she knew who they are, although that's kind of what they're doing with Henry now. I was afraid we would see Ito torturing Cindy, but he just had her locked up in his lair. I'm glad her memories were not erased, at least not yet, and Ito was saying how she was irresponsible, but at least as a result, he learned about Henry's powers. Then Cindy threatened to kill Ito like she did to her mom, so Ito shut the window and told his minions to shut her up with gas. Wow, what a horrible dad, especially since he said he did that to her as a child, and he's still using his World War II methods. Pat had been reluctant about letting Henry join the team, so Courtney asked the others at school. I don't know what she was expecting, but obviously Yolanda was furious. She finally had something good going on in her life thanks to Courtney, and now Courtney was gonna ruin it by bringing in the person who she thinks ruined her life. Beth sided with Courtney and thinking that Henry could still change, but Rick did not, and I found it weird that he was acting like he's such a nice guy. I only felt bad for Yolanda. Next, we saw the ISA having a meeting where they were joined by Dr. Ito, who told them the news that they could now go on with Project New America because Henry has his dad's powers, so they no longer need to wait for Brainwave to wake up. We also learned that it's not just going to affect Blue Valley, but a larger part of the country, and I suppose it'll eventually spread to the whole country. The interesting part of this is that it seems it only affects adults, which benefits the JSA but not Pat, and I wonder if it's similar to the brainwashing that Ito has been doing to his minions, but on a bigger scale. After the meeting, Icicle went back to his office and Barbara came to see him. He didn't feel satisfied now that his mission of avenging his wife's death was over, and this part confused me on whether he was talking about Project New America or killing the people who hurt her because he's finished both of them. Barbara tried to cheer him up and invited him and his family over for dinner. After school, Pat held a meeting for the JSA and Yolanda didn't show up since she was still mad. Rick was still being annoyed about how Henry shouldn't join the team, and Pat told him to go over some plans to see if there were any tunnels under the town that the ISA could be using, which we know they are, so I'm glad Pat is finally getting a chance to be smart. Rick decided to look over his dad's journal instead, and then we got a bit of an Our Night moment when Beth told him that she found out a group called the Other Founding Fathers were the ones that built the tunnels under the town. While all of this was going on, Courtney and Yolanda went to see Henry at the hospital at different times. First, Courtney went to see him and accidentally revealed that she hurt his dad, which angered him, of course. They talked about whether people are inherently evil or not. Courtney believes that people are not born as monsters, but can grow and become one, but they are also capable of changing, unlike what her friends believe because they think that Henry can't change. Meanwhile, Henry now had the same views as his father, that humanity are all monsters because of all the negative thoughts he was hearing, but Courtney pointed out how he was only hearing the bad ones from some people, but there is much more he hasn't heard. She tried to convince him to be better and join them, but instead it just made him mad. As a result, Yolanda snuck up on him later to tell him to stay away from Courtney. And I was surprised that Henry was able to see that it was Yolanda because her suit is actually better at hiding her identity. She actually has a mask that covers most of her face, and her hair is styled differently when she's Wildcat. I also thought for a second that maybe her mask would work like Professor X's helmet and keep Henry from reading her mind, but it didn't. Unfortunately, she also wouldn't let Henry talk and explain that it wasn't him who sent out her nudes, but I understand that it's hard for her. She also threatened to kill him again, and with how she was on the wall, it reminded me of Batman, specifically in Batman vs. Superman. But I also found it funny how she was whisper talking to sound threatening like the Reverse Flash does, which is annoying. And also, where exactly did she go when she jumped out the window? Pat had gone home because he thought that he had some important family business and found Barbara trying to cook and failing. He stayed to help her and once again tried to tell her the truth, but he was stopped by Courtney. At that moment, the McKinns arrived and Courtney went to answer the door and saw Cameron. I love this whole dinner scene. It was kind of like when Norman Osborn came over to Aunt May's house in the original Raimi Spider-Man movies. Before they ate, the McKinns said a creepy prayer, but no one understood, not even stupid Cameron, because he learned French instead of Norwegian. Icicle's parents liked Barbara since she had the same values as them about the town, but they didn't like Courtney and were talking about her in Norwegian. It looked like that made Pat and Mike suspicious a bit. After Courtney went to get more food, she gave a hot plate to Icicle, and while everyone looked at the dog, he touched the burning plate with no worries, and Courtney realized that he's Icicle. She made an excuse to go tell Pat, although shouldn't it be obvious he looks exactly like Icicle except his head is in blue, and people were able to realize Courtney is Stargirl because her mask barely covers her face. Before the McKenns left, Cam and Courtney talked about missing Homecoming, but Courtney was now suspicious of him since she thought that maybe he's like Cindy and could be working with his dad. So poor Cam, because he's innocent and maybe that's the end of their relationship. They hugged before he left and that was awkward, and then Jordan asked her if she knew the real reason he was there. It seemed like he might know she was Stargirl, but he just wanted to meet the girl his son liked and he approved of her. I kind of feel like it was neither of those reasons, and he actually went because he likes Barbara. After the McKenns left, Pat and Courtney were discussing what to do about Cam and Jordan down in the basement when Barbara walked in and saw the staff. She finally knows what's going on. It took her long enough. I was starting to think it would happen next season. And we know she'll probably be against Courtney being a hero, but I'm curious who she's going to side with later on, and if she's going to believe them about Jordan since she's grown very close to him. Finally, we went back to Henry, who was still with his dad at the hospital when the lawyer the maid was talking about earlier came in to see him. He said that his dad had asked to be taken off life support if he ever ended up like this, but Henry read his thoughts and realized he was lying and only wanted to keep his dad's money. So Henry did the same thing as Brainwave did at the beginning and caused the lawyer to have some sort of seizure, killing him. But the biggest surprise was that at that exact moment, Brainwave finally woke up. However, he seemed confused, so I'm wondering if he might have had memory loss. My other guess is that he might have been the one that killed the lawyer in order to make Henry think he did it and make him just like him. But it would be good for him to have amnesia, at least for the JSA, because he knows Courtney's identity, and unlike Cindy, he's not locked up, so that's bad for them. Now that Henry killed someone, I guess you could say that he's gonna become like his dad, but he was really horrified at what happened. Then again, so was his dad at first. But now Henry gets to be the one to prove Courtney wrong or prove William Golding and Brainwave right by either turning into the monster that Brainwave thinks all humans are or actually changing and becoming a better person. I know I'm probably reading too much into this, but it's still interesting. I did not expect to like this episode that much. I thought it would be more filler, which it kind of was, but it was still really interesting. And other than his relationship with Henry, I thought Brainwave was one of the more boring villains before this episode, although not as lame as the Gambler, so I wasn't really excited for an episode about him, but he improved a lot now that we know more about him. I think I will give this episode an 8.5 out of 10. It set up everything as we go towards the final episodes with Project New America being complete and the JSA finally taking on Dragon King as we see in next week's promo, which is actually the best promo the show has had in my opinion. All the other ones were really cringy. I'm also curious if Icicle's parents have any connection to Dragon King and if they might have been on the Nazi side during the war, even though they're Norwegian. Well, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for similar content. Leave your thoughts on the episode and the video in the comments and have a good day. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.